You would have been happy to spend the rest of the day just unpacking what Christy's given us. But it is a summit. We want to open up and elevate this conversation. We've started by thinking about what is it like to lead here in our home turf of New South Wales, where the conference is this year, side by side with other teachers, where you're both teaching and trying to lead practice excellence. Now let's take the scale up one level and start to think about school-wide change. And Cale, Birk, we met about 5 years ago in Canada after the Canadian Principals and Vice Principals Conference. And they brought me in not because I had much content, because I had a foreign accent. And this year I've brought you in. No, not because of that. Cale and I were talking, and I saw, number one, a high school educator and a high school principal who at that time had driven deep and impressive change. And to be honest, they're all too rare in our system. And then moving through from there to start to think about system-wide change. And I remember when you took on the job as Director of Innovation, you were starting to say, what's it going to be like to take the things that I've learnt leading school improvement at a high school and start to try to impact multiple schools? So Cale, it's so wonderful that you got on that incredibly long-haul flight across the Pacific on Saturday. That you arrived probably the day after you lost a day in the air.
Yes.
You went for a run around the harbour.
It was too hot.
It's too hot. And now we invite you to come and share with us a little bit about your journey and your journey about leading teacher learning at a whole school and even beyond a whole school level. Will you please make this wonderful British Columbian very welcome?
Hey. So I'm not moving far from here just so the clicker keeps advancing, but very excited to be here today. This is my first time in Sydney. It was 8 degrees when I left home and 38 yesterday. That was unexpected. So we're going to be talking a little bit about creating these organizational routines for professional growth. But before we do that, can I just say it? It's so cool to hang out with our much cooler Australian cousin. That's what I feel. Everything that you do here is just that much cooler than what we do in Canada. And I'm serious. I mean, g'day, mate, which I want to quickly acknowledge that's my worst attempt at the Australian accent. I have no idea, but g'day, mate. See, I want to finish with a question because we tried to steal that, but this is what we ended up with. And yours, you picture this sort of cruisy, tanned person welcoming you. This is like my grandma Eva, who can't hear very well. Like, I don't know where we fell down. You guys have this great sort of national animal. It's sleek and athletic and cute all at once, which is super cool. I don't know what we were thinking. It's smelly and has bad teeth, and that's our national animal. But you know, the one place where we should have Australians is anything to do with winter. We live in the winter. And this is my family here. That's my 10-year-old and my 8-year-old and my wife, who is turning 29 for the 13th time this year coming up. But that's at our famous hill, Sun Peaks. And at Sun Peaks, we have a ton of Australians. My daughter's ski coach is Australian. Everyone who works there is Australian. But I thought, there's no way. We've got to have them on the coolness factor here. So one of the things that we do is this great New Year's torch run. And this is kids and parents going out and skiing down on New Year's Eve. And what do the Australians do? They actually ski a run in their bikinis. So on behalf of Canada, you win, we lose. You are so much cooler. But, you know, it's a cool time to be in British Columbia right now. British Columbia is just in the process of adopting a competency-based curriculum, which is super exciting. We're actually using content to teach the things that we think are important for kids, like critical thinking and communication. And it's starting to show. We have really limited the number of standardized tests. We actually only have standardized tests in grade 4, grade 7, and then we have 2 in grades 10 through 12. That's it. And the results are starting to bear themselves out. In the PISA metric, we've done very well. Our readers are the best in the world, and we've done well in math and science. But you know, as neat as that is in British Columbia, and how we could be really proud of that, I think the thing that I'm most proud of is our work with our Indigenous learners. And our Indigenous learners, particularly in the district that I'm from in Kamloops, where our graduation rate was 54% 6 years ago, it is now 80% for our Aboriginal learners. It is truly amazing what's happened in BC, and it's an exciting time for us and something I'm very proud of. But with that, and in this time, I had this opportunity to become this director of innovation in my district and around my province. And so what that did is that took me from being a high school principal of a school of about 1,000 students, maybe a few less on a Friday afternoon, 80 staff members, and an admin team, to working with an entire district, to working with 40 schools and 15,000 students and 100 administrators. And while that was neat to work on these immersive learning experiences, which is really what my focus is, I also got this kind of interesting window to look at what instructional leadership actually looks like on the ground, pragmatically, which was very different than what we read about in textbooks. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And just sort of what are some of those conditions that we can create for impact? And so I started as a high school teacher. Well, it's a lie. I actually started on the pre-med track. I took some science courses. And I realized very quickly that the medical profession would be much safer without me. So I went into the place where all the money is, which is education. And so I was a high school teacher, biology and physical education. And I had that moment where I looked at my then principal and thought, I can do this better. Now, it was much like as parents, when you think you're the best parent in the world prior to having children, and you judge people for the manners of their children, the amount of screen time and all that sort of stuff, then you actually have children and you lose Father of the Year by January 5th, and you're actually researching benefits of screen time just so you can have a break, right? And so I jumped into administration. I got my master's degree in educational leadership. And much to my chagrin, I walked in, of course, thinking that this would be me, that I would just somehow will the system with effort and my new sort of theories that no one, of course, had ever thought of on moving the system forward, that somehow just my own personal sort of spirit would make this happen. So I walked in armed with books and all these thoughts and all those authors. And what was really interesting, and I know you'll find this surprising, no one wanted to talk about that stuff, actually. When I went in to be an administrator, what I found is that for the most part, the busy life of a teacher was there. And it was all about things like, I need more resources. We didn't have enough resources. There's not enough time to do things. My kids are behaving poorly, and I get it. I don't know about in Australia, but we don't just have helicopter parents. We have like Black Hawk Down, attack helicopter parents in British Columbia. So, our teachers rightfully wanted to talk about this stuff. And, I'd say good things like this, say, oh, we've got to be lifelong learners. And of course, the response was not so great. Clearly, I had it all figured out. But what I recognized is this wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to just will people. The research, they didn't want to hear it. We needed to do something different. So I jumped into structure. And shortly after I got into administration, I went to a professional learning communities conference in San Diego, and it just made sense at the time. I mean, those 4 questions and that we need to make learning the constant and time the variable, I was just like, yes, this is it. And so we very quickly adopted everything that we could with the professional learning community. We had this amazing timetable with embedded collaborative time, and also backed on with a tutorial for students that was both volunteer and directive to meet their outcomes. We had this amazing response to intervention system, and so very quickly we saw some changes in our results, and so much so that our school was recognized as one of the only 2 model PLC schools in all of BC. So that was exciting, and we were starting to move forward, but I noticed a couple of things. And what I noticed was that, we built all these structures and we put these things into place. And I quickly realized that, I had the mantra that if you build it, they will come. And very quickly I recognized that if you build it, they won't necessarily come. Our collaborative time started to kind of fall apart. Our middle level leaders, our coordinators, they were complaining that this collaboration time was hard. People didn't want to get together. And what were we supposed to do during this time? It was so difficult. And I think I kind of hit rock bottom when one of my teachers said this. I'm not sure what Hattie says about solo collaboration, but I'm thinking it's not a huge effect size. And so I realized that structures weren't quite enough. Now, British Columbia, one of the things that's really interesting about BC is that we have become a real nexus, I think, of professional development. Certainly those who have worked with Linda and Judy here with Spirals of Inquiry, that's a BC-based program. And we also did a number of other things with learning communities. Of course, we've done a bunch of work with Harvard with instructional rounds in our province. And so these processes, that's what I thought would really make the difference. And with those processes, and I want to say that these are all very laudable, research-based, have so much promise to them. But we started hearing comments, not only in my own district, but around the province, that it was taking us a year to come up with our guaranteed viable curriculum. And agreeing on common assessments was really difficult. With Spirals, we would hear sometimes that we never seemed to get past hunch. I'm not sure, it kind of stalls out. And certainly with instructional rounds, we would have people saying it takes us 4 months to come up with a problem of practice. And so these initiatives, while they had all the research and support behind them, it still was a struggle for people. And that's kind of at that point, when I kind of hit rock bottom. But you know what's interesting is at that moment, that's when I became this director of innovation. And I started going not only around my community, but around the province and to different places around the world to actually understand what was the learner experience, not for our students, but for our educators. What did that look like? We had spent so much time focusing on the classroom, but how could we focus on the experience for our educators in our building? What was that actually looking like? And it was about this time that I met, backing up here, I met Simon, and of course this is me trying to be just as cool as he was, so I dressed just like him. Yeah. We actually text each other to see, and just like yesterday, what we're going to wear, and he thinks it's because we're going to dress differently, and I always think so I can dress the same, so I can be cool, just like him. Yeah, actually, that was a true story. We both came down, hadn't seen each other for months, walked into the lobby, and we're like, oh boy, we're going to look a little dorky here. So he made me change. Thank you. But it was at this time that Simon and I had come at this from different angles, and he started to talk about sprints. And he started to talk about how, you know, what was really neat about sprints is that it really sort of worked for teachers. And you've heard that with the Agile mantra, and I think this is the missing factor. It's the single missing factor that I've seen is the human factor. And that is if it doesn't work for teachers, it doesn't work. And I've seen that over and over again. No matter what the process or willing people through that or structures, it has to work. And I think that's where the work with Simon has been really interesting, because with sprints and with the systems that I've seen that have worked, there's been some common elements. It's relevant, meaning, is it important to me? Is this really going to make a difference to my teaching life? Is it close to my workflow? One of the things I think we have to be super careful with is saying that we have sort of initiative fatigue. I think even if we have one initiative, just one, but it is so far from people's workflow, even the most well-intentioned of people just don't have the bandwidth. So we have to ensure that it's within workflow. And the last piece is how quickly am I going to get feedback on this? Does this stuff actually make a difference? There's nothing worse than when we go on to a diet right after New Year's and a month later we actually weigh more. Like, I just give up at that point. So we want to make sure that there's positive feedback there. And so Simon started to talk about sprints. And he talked about these sort of rapid iterative cycles, teachers working in these high-performing teams, and they would get results quickly to see if what they were doing was making a difference. And this started to tick some boxes for me mentally. But I won't lie, I tried to wreck the model. And I really did, because I thought, as much as those things are great, if this doesn't work for teachers, then it doesn't work. So I actually tried to launch sprints at the single most difficult time in the school year in British Columbia, which is in the months of May and June. People are so busy at this time of year, you cannot go into their classrooms. They don't want to see you. And I thought, well, if Simon says this works, let's see if this actually works. If we test it at the busiest time of the year and it doesn't work, then it doesn't tip that human factor. So I put out a call to our district at the busiest time of the year, May, June, the total no-fly zone. And I said, I just want to try this with 3 schools. And I got 6 that signed up, which was kind of interesting. I didn't expect that. And so we did our pilot starting May the 6th. It ended on June the 11th. And when I did my all-call for September shortly afterwards so I could plan another one, we had 20 schools sign up. And that wasn't because of me. That was teachers talking to teachers. And so suddenly, that started to work for me. And when you think about it, in terms of meeting that human factor, the relevance is there because people are working on something that they want to work on in their classrooms with students that need it. So it was relevant. In terms of close to workflow, it was. And my evidence was that teachers were talking to other teachers about how this is easy. And finally, we got feedback because not only were our teachers seeing what worked, they saw what didn't work, and they could quickly, for once, push something off their plate, which we almost never do. We just keep adding. So they could push it off their plate. And I think the real thing about all this, though, is that as much as I saw these schools coming out, I don't know how many of you have a friend who you actually kind of get scared when you ask their opinion. You know, like they're the ones that'll walk up to you and actually say that you look terrible and just walk in the other direction. And what actually hurts is they're right most of the time. So I went to a colleague that I really trust, that has seen every initiative come through every building, that has been a teacher forever, and they will always give me their honest opinion. And when I talked to Amanda about what she thought of sprints, she said this: I used to think that most improvement strategies required big changes to make a small difference. But with sprints, we can actually make a big difference with small changes. And so to me, with all those schools, and coming from someone that I really was nervous about asking, this is the response I got, which made me think, I think we might have something here. And at the end of the day, learning sprints works for teachers, and that's what I've seen. And I have the evidence to support that because sprints continues to grow. So, I do want to say this, that these things are still very important. We still have to put in the effort. No one is going to tell us that there's less to do in our schools. No one's going to tell us that there's more money. That's not going to happen. So we still have to have that sort of superhuman approach sometimes. The structures are really important. And Simon has said this, and we're going to hear more about this today. They need to be based in research. No one has time to pursue things that aren't research-based. No one has time. And there does have to be processes that go to guide those structures, that's for sure. But at the end of the day, for me, I think this: to create impactful professional growth, instructional leaders must ensure that organizational routines actually work for the people who will be using them. And I think that's something that I've learned through my sort of journey, my personal journey, around all the different initiatives that we have in our schools, is if it works for teachers, it truly works. I'm very excited to be here and hang out with my cool Australian cousins. I won't lie, I was so dorky yesterday when I was running that there was kind of a long zap strap on the ground, and I actually thought it was a snake, and I kind of leaped over it like a little girl. And so I'll try to be a little bit cooler while I'm here, and I really look forward to spending more time with you. So thank you very much, folks.